Hello, everyone. This is Grandmaster Hans Demon, and we are back with a chapter which is going to be covering one F5, known as the Dutch. It would not be a lifetime repertoire without the Dutch, and I'm really, really happy with what I've been able to suggest against the Dutch, because it is, we are able to really encapsulate the Jobava London and keep the authenticity of it and keep the same sort of plans. Of course, we're going to be playing G4 quite a bit, and as you'll see, so I'm really happy with the analysis we've done of the Dutch. What we're going to be playing is knight f6, knight c3, knight f6, and then bishop to f4. And basically, on all accounts here, G4 is going to be the next move. So there's quite a few options here. Knight c3 is the main move. But bishop f4 is definitely a lesser known move. Not lesser known, but I'd say less popular. But in Jobava London style, I think if we can put the bishop on f4 and that on c3, I think we have to do it, just in line with the themes of the opening. So the most common move after e6. And here we're going to unleash some very, very cool stuff with the move g4. And when I started to, originally this course wasn't going to be a lifetime repertoire. But as I started to look into other openings and looking at the Dutch, I really just felt like I wanted it to be a lifetime repertoire just so I could go into how to crush the Dutch, because I think the Dutch is a ridiculous opening that everyone should permanently retire in chess. So after g4, there are a few ways that our opponents can respond. Four sort of logical ways, right? So they can take with the f-pawn, take with a knight, can also go bishop to b4, and then d5 is another option as well. The first one I want to talk about is fg4. I think it's just very natural. Take this pawn. And at this point, we're going to play h3, sort of like a Banco style. Pitching the pawn and then giving this, trying to open up the structure. And, of course, we want our opponents to take this pawn, after which we actually ignore the pawn and play queen to d3. Just to know, the only move for black here to even be okay is to play g3, pitching the pawn, just because it's so important that the king side doesn't open, especially if the h-file opens. That'll be of extreme danger to a black king on that side. And here we would take with a bishop d5, and we play queen to d3. And this is another position where our opponents have to be ridiculously accurate. The main point is we're obviously gonna castle queenside, and the open g file, especially castling queenside in response. So with knight f3, rook g1. Let's say we just play some normal moves, right? Like castles, even delaying castles, rook g1. The attack on the black king, is going to be absolutely decisive. Just having the open g file. So our opponents really have to be extremely precise about how they deal with that. For example, c5 is the only move not to go. We'll briefly look at, let's say, bishop b4. You simply play a3. And after captures bishop g2, knight c6, a few general rooms, you play the move h4, you're ready to castle, the knight can come to h2 to f4, h5, h6 is an idea. You've got the two bishops. The open g file later on could be of great use of attacking. This is absolutely terrible. So c5 is sort of the crux, right? If our opponents are going to challenge us here, they're going to challenge us with g3, d5, queen e3 followed by c5. This is the most critical variation. By far, everything else is just great for white. And this is also still great, but just not as great, After knight c6, they have to play knight f3, have to play knight c6. It's I noticed this. I say the next move instead of the first move. It's just a weird. I wonder if there's research. We have to research why these slips happen. But anyways, we play a3, prophylaxis, covering the b4 square. After cd4, we actually play knight b5 instead of recapturing. Creating an immediate threat. Queen a5, c3. Really trying to focus on getting, the coordination between the Z and bishop throughout the opening is really great. It's kind of funny because some people might see this knight and bishop as such a layman's, such a basic way of attacking, but it's surprisingly very effective. And after pawn takes, our this knight c7 cannot be allowed. They have to shut down the diagonal with e5 and then a6, which, this whole sequence is extremely precise. Knight takes, and then now taking the b5 knight. But after knight to d4, again, this is sort of quite a forced complex variation. We still have this outpost on d4, the strong knight. We're going to go bishop g2 and castles, and things still remain extremely complex, but white still has the upper hand just because of the bishops being extremely strong. And again, the isolated pawn and still some attacking possibilities remain on the king side. But again, this is just a position of how precise black has to be, right? Like if you play a normal move like bishop b7, like we discussed, this attack is going to be extremely strong. Opposite sides castling, we are definitely much faster here. So in this case, fg4, if you're not playing h3, h6, g3, it's a recipe for disaster, right? Let's say they take, you go queen d3, ignoring the pawn as well. Bishop b4, now we take on h3, preparing knight to g5. Let's say after a move like castles, so casually, knight g5, h6, rook takes h6. If pawn takes queen, check, king h8 here, check, castles. These are like sleeping beauties. Even this can be considered a sleeping beauty. Queen h6, e3, all the pieces are coming in. I finished, queen g7, we simply go back. We're down a rook, right? But bishop d3, rook g1. This king is absolutely dead. We can try to go after the bishop takes. I ended the variation here, but basically rook g1's coming next, and these pieces aren't exactly going to be getting a participation award. I think participation awards are absolutely ridiculous, which is why I'm not going to be giving any of these pieces participation awards in this case. So that is how things can go extremely wrong, right? Even if queen e7, castles, d5, knight g5, again, h7 is going to collapse. When there isn't really a safe place for black to go on the king side, the queen side isn't certainly as viable as well. The longer the king remains in the center, the more chance we have to break things open, and black's position is simply going to collapse. So in this case, g3 is really quite critical. Bishop g4, immediately you can just simply take. Again, opening things up. If queen e7, now queen d3, you're threatening to play g5 and target the h7 pawn. Let's say knight takes g4, you're already going to be taking on h7. Rook takes, queen takes. Let's say knight f6, you can check and even go into an endgame at worst case and just be up a pawn simply. So it's really it's hard to really understand what black is really doing unless this g4. I'll add one more thing. Like let's say knight d5, you can play bishop takes b8. One interesting point is, let's say here, maybe it's not all fours, but bishop d6. Deflecting the bishop, now you take, and you've got a clean extra pawn. This pawn's also isolated as well, so it's not going to be much help. But regardless, right? If the king side even opens, you don't play g3, things are absolutely collapsing, right? So this is a great way to catch your opponents if they take with the f pawn, which is quite natural. So let's say they take with the knights. Now we're going to go e4, taking advantage of this pawn being tethered to this knight, taking full control over the center for the time being. Our opponents will likely play knight bishop b4, challenging. Now we're going to go queen f3 in traditional fashion, castling queenside as quickly as possible, getting our king out of danger so we can take advantage of our opponent's king being in danger. It protects the the f4 bishop. It maintains here. It also keeps some ties to c3. It's really, really a great move. Here black has two options: castles, and knight f6 as well. After knight f6 here, we simply go knight e2. And again, we're down a pawn, but this open g file. I'm glad that the g pawn is not there, because this g file is going to be a straight line to the black king. We're going to castle next. Again, castled, fully developed, total initiative, free attack. What more can you ask for? And I think, let's say queen h4, castles, takes, knight c6, rook g1. Again, you've got great play. It's really not clear. Again, all these pieces don't, like all of white's pieces are active, but it just seems like some of black's pieces are just sleeping and are never going to wake up. The Sleeping Beauty reference is just so accurate. I thought it was a decent movie. It was a decent movie. So all this play, right, is great. Another way to play is, let's say you play castles, then we actually take advantage to take, and taking back leads to really, we're down a pawn, but we have a hugely development in the king side. This king with the open G file is absolutely dead. Like let's say D5, we're going to go knight H3, next is queen G3, next is rook G1, then we play F3, the knight's kicked back, then we bring the bishop into E5 in combination with the knight on F4, with the bishop on D3, we could triple, we can create an Alekhine's gun, on the G file, we got the bishop pair, the pawn is simply an afterthought, really. In this case, they can take, of course, the computer says take, takes, knight F6, and we're actually going to ignore this pawn and castle immediately. And, again, I've used this phrase. I could write a book about this position, but the main point is we're going to go knight H3, rook G1, and attack the king with everything that we have, just like we have in the other positions. So, knight G4, E4, this is sort of really difficult. Queen F3, castles E5. The G file is really just such a great way to immediately go for the throat. So another move that you should consider is bishop to b4, which is pretty natural. But again, once you trade, these pawns, I think the computer suggestion here is just ridiculous. Like you're supposed to play takes, d6, not even recapturing the pawn. And then, of course, naturally, the best move is e3, ignoring the pawn. All very logical and normal ways of thinking. But let's say they just simply take back. Again, we go queen d3, castling next. Let's say knight to e4 to try to attempt us to stop being castling. We actually play castles anyways. We can't take on f2 because of queen e3 check. And the best point is after bishop takes e3, recapturing would allow takes, and if queen e3 check, retreating the knight. But actually, we're just like, okay, f3. I want you to, try going to f2. I'm going to check you, and then the e4 square is covered. So if the knight goes back, we simply just take the bishop. So you can get a pawn for the good, but after knight f6, knight h3, castles, rook g1, again you're a pawn for the good, but I've got the bishop pair. I'm going to play e4 next, and all of my pieces are going to be aiming at that black king, and it's not going to be pretty. I continue to king h8, e4. I don't think there's much of a point continuing here. I think it's very obvious how convincing this attack is, and the king is just chilling on b2, right? Even if any checks happen, right? This is just so unrealistic. We can go back. Again, all the pieces are dormant. All of our pieces are active, and this king is in a world of hurt. We're taking it to Pain Town. And we're not going to talk, that phrase has been repeated too many times. That's the first time I've said it, but I'm not going to repeat it. Regardless, at this point, also d5 is possible, which just allows a3. And now the bishop is forced to make a decision. If we take it, we get the bishop pair. We're happy. Open g file. We're going to crush. Bishop can go back to e7. Then we play h4, preventing any knight h5 ideas. And we're simply going to, queen g3, knight f3, h5. Same king side attack. Opposite sides castles. We've got the stronger attack. We're going to be faster. We're going to, our counterplay is going to be more effective. So the last move that we should consider is d5, which is not much of a challenging move, but I suppose it's quite logical in some respects. We simply take and go e3, and then here there's a few ways that we can challenge, right? In bishop d6, we respond with queen f3 in traditional fashion. This is definitely not the first time you've seen queen f3 in response to bishop d4, sort of maintaining the control of his diagonal. If bishop to b4 as well, we still play a3, and we actually are encouraging our opponent to double these pawns. And in this case, again, we continue with the same h4, h5 idea, really trying to really attack on the king side. Because our king is just perfectly safe in the center, as it is. The bishop pair as well, like, the dark squared bishop dominating the dark squares is an even more of a reason for our attack to be so successful, because our opponent can simply not challenge those squares and defend those squares in the proper way without their own dark squared bishop. So in respect to this, right, bishop d6, queen f3, and we have this trade. And again, this is just literally an absolute dream. You have complete control over all the dark squares. This bishop is so ugly. It's locked in with a light square structure. And still, we have a huge lead in development. I would say that c6 is also interesting, but it doesn't really make much of a difference, right? We just go bishop d3, bishop e6, knight f3, h4, again, extending. We can go this way. We want to remove the knight on e4, so knight g5 is an interesting point. Bishop g8, now we go knight e2. Knight g3 can happen. We can go c3, queen b3 to sort of put pressure on the queen side. Again, the king's still safe in the center. It's possible to go queen side. So again, black's king is still in the center. Quite awkward position. It's hard for black to really play this. So yeah, for some reason the back button just doesn't work on ChessBase. I have no idea why. It's been a weird thing. Anyways, so I think if our opponents are playing d5, we're already quite happy, right? The critical points after fg4 is to play h3 and open up the king side. The critical point after knight g4 is to play e4 and queen f3 to immediately castle and try to go e5. And again, the g file is the ultimate sort of valley or the road that we're taking, and that road leads us to eternal happiness and success. So that's how you should think about it. The G file is a representation. Okay, I could make so many jokes. Oh my God. Okay, never mind. Yes, okay. So back to the serious stuff. There are other moves other than e6, right? Our opponent can play d5, which is quite a popular move, but in traditional fashion, we're going for knight to b5. And we're forcing knight a6, and we're getting e3. And this is basically a transposition to our position with e6, like 3e6 when the pawn is on f7. But in this case, instead of the pawn being, let's say e6 here, instead of the pawn being on f7, it's on f5, which just gives us the e5 outpost and makes, black's position so loose and weak. So we're basically getting this, but just pawn on f5, right? You can have the pawn on f5, man. Put it there whenever you want. So we simply go knight f3, c3, knight c3, knight c7, bishop b3, and again, the structure is just absolutely hideous, right? Sometimes in a Dutch, they can prevent you from getting the bishop on f4, but our pieces are literally perfectly placed. We're going to go knight e2, castles. We're going to play c4. We're going to establish central control. The knight on the c7, I don't know where it's going. It seems to be lost. Maybe it needs a phone number written on it so they can call their mom and figure out where that knight is going. Because it seems like just someone's confused here and someone has no idea what's going on, and it is black. D5 really just allows us to get basically just an amazing position from a structural perspective, just an improved version of what we already go for, right? So there's G6 is another move. There are sort of, I guess, there are different types of Dutch players. There are Dutch players who exclusively bring this bishop to G7, and there are players that might play both, and players that exclusively play E6, right? So your Leningrad Dutch players might play G6 here out of pure instinct, but for example, let's say C4, knight C3, knight F6, knight C3. There's going to be players who play the E6 Dutch and the G6 Dutch, and a G6 Dutch player in this specific position out of instinct might just play G6 and then land themselves in huge trouble after H4, bishop G7, E3. And, this move H5, we're going to kind of keep in reserve, right? I think I ended one chapter talking about we're playing this move order because we know that our opponents don't want to go into the French, but they play the French because they allow the French because they know that we're not comfortable in the French and that we want to avoid the French. So they can get away with not knowing the French because they're more comfortable than we are uncomfortable in the French. So in this case, we're sort of saying H5, we're going to play H5. We're going to play H5. They play D6. We're like, okay. They think we're going to play H5. Okay, bishop C4. We can wait. H5, the threat of H5 is more powerful than the move itself, right? H6, queen F3 again, They think we're playing H5, right? So they're going to play H6 so they can respond with H5 with G5. But we're actually saying, well, you just provoked a weakness on G6. Now we go queen f3 to go queen g3. You have to go e6 to give black the f7 square. So now after queen g3, king f7, you're doing some suspicious castling here. Now we castle, and king is on f7. The structure is it's like you're playing like a meme opening, and you're playing d6, e6, g6, h6. This looks like a literal failed bomb cloud, and that is the best representation of how bad this position is. A few ways to continue, like knight h3. Rook e1, e4. E4 is going to be the central break to break open the position and take advantage of this king that is sitting on f7 a little bit too comfortably. So I think this is certainly definitely not going to be something they're going to be happy with, right? So G6 gets them into immediate pressure. Another alternative is to play A6 to sort of prevent knight D5 to play D5 next. But now, of course, we go G4 and in traditional Jobava London. And here, we can go FG4. And in this case, we're going to play Queen D2, D5 castles. And the next idea is going to be H3. The point being, the interesting point is you might wonder why not H3 first, because in this case, once you play H3, the bishop is still on this diagonal. So like, takes, maybe bishop F5 is going to be an idea to aid in the defense. But once they've played E6, this bishop is completely shut out of the game, which makes our play on the light squares even more powerful. Like, takes, bishop takes, and the bishop is targeting E6, right? Knight's coming, rook, both open files. So we're going to wait for this and then to play H3. And then once everything opens up, this is just a better version of the previous positions that we analyzed with H3 and G3, because we're simply up a tempo because they played A6, which is not that useful. So in this case, D5 is also possible, but we simply play G5. There's actually a game here. And after knight E4, they played knight takes E4, F takes E4, and F3, which is actually not ideal. The point is you actually want to play E3. The point being that if our opponents play E6, now we take and play F3, and the addition of the E3 and E6 moves is actually positive because this D6, the F4 bishop, which previously could have been a target, is totally stabilized, and the D4 pawn has an extra layer of protection, which forces our opponents to either take or to let us take, which would then result in the doubled pawns and the E4 pawn being isolated and very weak. So if then they take, then we take with the knight, and all the development is flowing. The bishop will come to D3 next, and again, all these pieces lie dormant. We're going to castle next, and it's going to be a bloodbath. Or not really a bloodbath. I would just say slaughter, right? Because we're not going to be shedding any blood. That's a good vocabulary correction. So in this case, there was a game here, but again, it doesn't seem to be that critical of a line. So there's D6 here, which is a bit of a weird move. This also could be intuitive for some Leningrad players as well, because let's say in this case, some of them might play D6 before playing G6. Also, E6, D6 is a common theme, right? In this case, they might go like, not C3 here, and then D6. It's a bit weird, right? But people who play the Dutch are weird. So I guess I gave D6 some credit and decided to consider it. But again, the play is just ridiculously simple. And in traditional fashion, we play Queen D3, breaking for the E4 move next, and this is just amazing, right? We castle and we play H4, and again, bishop is terrible, super passive, weak pawn in E6. Let's say we trade. Again, bishop is coming to D3, knight is G5. You got a huge attack going on, and black has little to no counterplay. So, I think we've learned that the Dutch is just a bad opening. I think that's been established. It's just that, like anything that just makes zero sense, they're always very loyal and passionate and blind followers who, give the opening more credibility than it deserves. So I think this sort of sums up the critical lines from a variational perspective. Again, this G4 idea, breaking open the king side immediately, really takes advantage of the F5 pawn, and then just opening the king side and going for the immediate attack. As you mentioned, E6 being the most popular move, G4, and then as well going for Queen D3 castles, really going for rapid development, and taking the initiative is what the Jobava London is about. Especially when our opponents play dubious openings like the Dutch, which allow us to get extremely creative and have a lot of fun, like we've shown in this line. So I hope that after this, any Dutch players have been converted to non-Dutch players, and I hope that you enjoyed this chapter, and I'm looking forward to the next one.